and welcome to this slide presentation on native bees. I am Tracy Belhumer, a creative technologist for the city of Broomfield, and I work at Invent HQ. I wanted to thank Virginia Scott and Adrian Carper. They are both involved in the CU Bees Needs project, a citizen science project gathering data on native bees the last 7 years. So let's get started. This is a Bombus huntii sleeping in a flower and waiting for a female. Will be first available for a female in the morning. And that was taken at the Denver Botanic Gardens. So I am one of 4 women beekeepers who look after bees at on the roof of the Boulder Public Library and do a lot of outreach in the Front Range. We help organize a Pollinator Appreciation Month with the city of Boulder, and it ends in a big festival where we dress up like bees now, like Teresa here. And we get about 700 kids in the last year. We've been doing it this will be our 5th year. This September 12th, I believe it is, Saturday, next to the farmer's market. So that is me on the left, and then Teresa Beck, Deborah Foy, and Cynthia Scott. So something that always just blows my mind is that there are more species of bees and wasps combined than there are of plants. So in bees alone, it's more than birds, mammals, and amphibians combined. It's such a surprise. So Colorado has almost 1,000 different species. And here are some species that I've collected on my own here. The end of the season. These are not native, these are honeybees up here. Honeybees, and these are all native bees here. Bumblebees, native solitary bees, and you can see just how small they can be. And then other pollinators that we'll talk about just briefly. So honeybees aren't native. They were brought over by Europeans with their crops in the 1600s, and they have been really successful spreading here. And I didn't mention, but Colorado has about 1,000 different species of native bees here, which is a lot. And it's because of our different ecosystems and altitude. So in Boulder County alone, we have about almost 600 species, and here's a few of them here. You can see they vary in color and size. A little green sweat bee here. This one looks like a wasp, but if it's eating pollen and feeding pollen to its young, it's a bee. So let's see, most of these are solitary. So 98% of our native bees are solitary. So they nest either in the ground in dirt, burrow old rodent holes, or 30% nest in cavities like pithy stems, the tubes that we provide in native bee nesting houses. So here you can just see the diversity of native bees here. The smallest is this little perdita, and next to a carpenter bee. And in her whole life, this little perdita bee might only fly a baseball field width or length. So flowers are important in your backyard. But look at the different colors here: green, blue, iridescent blue, stripy, looking like a wasp, but it's not. What is a bee anyway? It is a fuzzy wasp that feeds pollen to its offspring. So about 150 million years ago, a wasp became a vegetarian, and the flowers were starting to pop up, and this relationship between fat flowers and insect pollinators evolved. So honeybees, native bees all feed pollen as a protein source to their young. Wasps feed meat. So other insects, larval stage, caterpillars. There's an aphid wasp that just feeds aphids to their young. Yellow jackets tend to feed like your picnic meats to their young, and dead insects. So here's an illustration that helps tell the difference, because many wasps and flies and beetles will visit flowers to drink nectar, but not all of those are bees. So you look at their legs. The Bumblebee obviously has very hairy legs. The honeybee does too, but special adaptations for carrying pollen. So one's really fuzzy looking and one's not so fuzzy. But if you look at a wasp's legs, they're designed to hold on to their prey. So they have little spurs on their legs. They have a little bit of hair, but their legs are mostly bare and designed to hold on to their prey. So flies also can look like bees and visit your flowers, and they are excellent pollinators because of the huge numbers of flies. So hover flies do just that. They hover over your flowers, and they are distinguished from bees. If you look very closely, their eyes touch at the top of their head, and they only have 2 wings instead of 4. Bees have 4 wings that hook together. So moths try to mimic bees as well for predation, so they don't get eaten. This is a sphinx moth or hummingbird moth, and its larval stage is a tomato hornworm. So it is beneficial to your garden if you just let it pupate. So bee benefits, and here you can see lots of fuzzy bees pollinating. If we didn't have bees, we would have a pretty colorless diet of yellow and white and just wind pollinated vegetables and crops. So we would definitely not have blueberries. Blueberries require buzz pollination. They require a bumblebee to grab the flower and shake and vibrate it so that the blossom will spit out its pollen. So there's been experiments in Northern Ontario of using tuning forks, ding, in front of blueberry blossom to get it to release its pollen. So even honeybees don't buzz enough to pollinate blueberries and tomatoes. So you need a bumblebee to do a good job of pollinating tomatoes. But all these colorful crops would be gone. And we would be left with, and looking on the right here, the wind pollinated crops, rice, wheat, and corn. So some children would be happy with that. But we wouldn't even have dairy, because dairy is it relies on alfalfa crops and pollinated crops for feeding. So it's not just us that are impacted, of course, it's our whole ecosystem. So if you look outside at the Colorado landscape, it's really reliant on our pollinators. And if our pollinator disappears, or that plant disappears because of climate change, it would actually, by the time we might have noticed, it can be too late to reintroduce a pollinator to preserve that ecosystem, or to reintroduce those plants, and at least in these altitudes that they're native to. So it's a whole food chain from grizzlies to songbirds affected. Another benefit, and why I started beekeeping, was, of course, to have more pollination in my garden. And you can see it down here. I live up in the mountains west of Boulder, and we have bears, so there's an electric fence right here. But we started keeping bees for pollination and, of course, honey. This is 5 pounds of honey right here, harvested at the end of the summer. And we like to make things with our hive products, so beeswax candles and propolis sprays and hand salves. And those things might be coming up eventually at the Broomfield Public Library or in HQ someday. So look at the wide range of sizes and shapes. This here looks like a wasp in the top right, and it has 4 wings. You just can't see that they're hooked together. Maybe you can see it here, the 4 wings on these. So let's look at our front range bees that we will have in our gardens. So bumblebees are the most charismatic. They're kind of like I guess the poster child for bees. They're definitely the cutest and fuzziest. So they, as I mentioned, they buzz pollinate like a tuning fork. They'll nest in old rodent holes in the ground, or you can try to attract them with your own shoebox buried under the ground about 6 inches. And you can look up information on how to do that. So they are eusocial, which means that they're only social for part of the year. The queen is the only member of the colony that survives the winter. So she hibernates, and she will be out flying now on these warm sunny days looking for a new nest site. So if you see really big bumblebees, those are females that were mated last year looking for new nest sites. So mason bees, these are some of my favorite bees. They're called that because of the mud they use in their nests. So they're one of those 98% of solitary bees that nest in the ground or cavities. So 30% of our native bees nest in cavities like old pithy stems, or if you provide for them straws or bamboo, leave your garden kind of messy, the twigs that you cut, you can lay them on their side in the corner of your yard, and you might get these native bees nesting in there. So they vary in color: blue, green, black, and they are, if you drill a hole in a bee block around 6 to 8 millimeters, you'll attract these little bees. My favorite is this one. It's the blue orchard mason bee. I think you can see it in my display here. It's a really small one. Let's see. Oh, it's not very visible. It's right here. So here's our honeybee up here, so you can tell the size. It's a little bit smaller, but it's iridescent blue. Oh dear. So these are called orchard bees because they are pollinators of fruit trees in the spring, and they only live for about 3 to 4 weeks in the year, and it's at the time of our fruit trees blossoming. So they are commercially produced by orchards, and you'll find at the sides and edges of orchards, they'll have rows upon rows of these large like bee hotels, lots of like just holes drilled or straws. So the leafcutter is another favorite bee of mine, and it is also another one that is commercially managed, especially for alfalfa crops. So one of the things I like to do, and this is a more active bee in the summer, so you'll get mason bees right now in the spring, April, very beginning of May, and then they die off and their young will emerge in the next spring. So then we get leaf cutters, and they're busy bees in the summertime on your, they love my sunflowers, and I find in the lilac bushes these nice holes cut out of them, and I actually collect bouquets of just the leaves with the holes in them because I find it quite amazing. So you can see the nest that they're making right now and lining the cavity with leaves. So they're a little bit larger than the mason bee. There's a bunch of different species of leafcutter bees. In my specimens here, I have 4 of them, different sizes. One's a European leafcutter bee, and then our native leafcutter bees. And they don't compete, and the European leafcutter bee is actually widespread now and a very beneficial pollinator in our landscape, well, in our crop systems. A carder bee, this is a funny bee. It's the male is very territorial. I don't have a specimen of this, but he looks more like a wasp color. The male will hang around in your lamb's ear, so your fuzzy lamb's ear plant that kids love to roll up and make bouquets with. The male waits for the female to come to collect fuzz for her nest, and here's the female building her nest in a wood block drilled hole. And this male is so territorial, it can't sting. Males of any bee species or wasp cannot sting, but it will headbutt the honeybees that come around to sip on the flowers and kick them out of their territory. So if you can see one and watch one, it's quite interesting to observe. And my daughter, it's one of her favorite things to do in the summer is look for these and watch their behavior. A sweat bee, it's nesting in the ground here. It's a great pollinator of squashes. Okay, I said pollinator of squashes, but this little sweat bee is more of a pollinator for brassicas. So there's 400 different species of sweat bees across the country and 90 in Colorado. So they like to lick the salt off of us and our sweat and use it, the minerals for their young. So this little sweat bee, this green, beautiful sweat bee, is a great pollinator for strawberries and all types of different flowers and fruit. But the most juicy, perfect strawberry, it needs about 200 visits per flower, or sorry, every single pistil on the strawberry plant, there's about 200 needs to receive pollen. So a honeybee, it usually lands only on the top of the flower, of the strawberry flower, so it doesn't reach every pistil. So we really need these sweat bees to make our beautiful, perfect strawberries. This is a male squash bee here sleeping in a squash blossom. And if you harvest squash blossom, once in a while, you'll have one pulsating with a little male bee inside. So they sleep in the flower for protection, and when the flower opens in the morning, they will be the first available male for the female. So they're beautiful native bee with some really interesting behaviors, and they follow human populations where we've grown squashes and pumpkins and for hundreds of years. So they'll nest in the ground near their favorite squashes. And here's more of them. You can see a yellow-faced bee looks like a wasp. They will nest in the bee block in the holes, the smallest of the holes that you drill, 1/8 inch. They steal pollen, so you see they don't have adaptations for carrying pollen. So here are some nesting strategies of different solitary bees. You can see here's a mason bee, like a mud dauber wasp, making its own nest on the side of a rock. Again, these leaf cutter, cavity nesting bees here. In tubes, you can see like there's little compartments, either separated by mud or resin. You can see, or in this case, leaves right here. Here's some resin. An alkali bee, some of those sweat bees can dig down pretty deep in the soil, 2 or 3 feet or so. And here you can clearly see the cavities in here. So basically, each of these native bees solitary bees are leaving a ball of pollen that's wet with nectar, not honey. They don't make honey, but the pollen and nectar are formed into balls, and then a little egg is laid on top of these compartments. And what's interesting is at the front of the cavity, the female will choose to lay only males. So they emerge first and mill about and wait for the females to emerge from these cavity nests. And then at the back are the females that are more protected from predation, like birds and insects. So you can see here the nest box that was used by the Bees Needs citizen science study. They were handed out over the last 7 years, and I think funding there's no funding this year for it. So you can drill your own. You can drill anywhere from 1/8 inch on the right side to 5/16 is the largest size here. Use untreated wood, try and make the tunnels smooth, and then you have to have the back sealed. The hole shouldn't go all the way through, just to prevent more parasitic wasps and bees from moving in. So more information at xerces.org. beechicas.com has some more information as well. And here's some different varieties. You can use a PVC pipe in your backyard and mount it under an eave or something, and that's really effective. Filling it with straws or with bamboo. Here's some more larger bee hotels. Hopefully these become more popular and widespread. This is one that the Bee Chicas put up at the Boulder Public Library. And in the first year, we had about 12 different species of native bees nesting in it, and even more now. So here we are building some bee houses for City of Broomfield's bee month, which is a bit postponed till next year. But if you come into InventHQ, you can build your own during open hours. Here's Mary volunteering to cut bamboo, and Lo and Ryan drilling blocks. So you might see some of these native bee houses installed in open space around Broomfield over the next year. So the wood shop, and that's Dan, Mary and Bob. And here is one of the workshops that we did get to have at InventHQ in the beginning of March. And you can see there's bamboo straws inside of a laser cut housing and metal roof donated by the Sheet Metal Training Institute. We did have fun there. Okay, why do bees need our help? This is why I love to teach about bees, because then I can enlist people to help bees. So habitat loss is a big one. We used to have meadows, and lawns became popular in the 1950s, and grass is basically a desert for a bee. That little Perdita bee can't cross a football field in its whole life, or in its whole life it won't cross a football field, so it needs flowers immediately around it. So if you can think meadow, not lawn, that would really help. Insecticides and herbicides, pesticides are a big part of our agricultural system right now. Neonicotinoids, I don't want to talk too much about it, but it's, how do we summarize it? So neonics are about 10,000 times more toxic to a bee compared to DDT. And we're putting thousands and thousands of tons of neonicotinoids into the environment each year. And it's affecting everything from the oceans and the zooplankton up to like songbirds and our honeybees. So it's a toxic product, and this is why the Bee Chicas and our Front Range have been working hard to try and eliminate use in city areas. So monocrop culture, that means like if you drink almond milk, you are supporting, and I drink almond milk, 40 miles of a single crop in California where there's no food for bees. So we have to bring in honeybees from around the country, and 1 year import them from Australia to pollinate those almond crops. And there is more discussion about honeybees and the stress of transportation and what is it called, migratory beekeeping, where we move bees to pollinate crops like on the East Coast, the blueberries and the apples, and then in the West Coast, the almonds, and all at different times of the year. So the bees are all moving around, migrating, and in dense areas spreading disease. Varroa mites have not spread to our native bees. They affect our honeybees, but there are some diseases that can pass between our native bees, from our honeybees to our native bees. So I'm very sensitive about where I keep my bees. And then of course, climate change. So what you can do, so bee-friendly gardens, plants that bloom all the way from March to October. Bees especially need food in the fall when there's so much competition amongst wasps and bees. It's partly our dry climate in the fall. So I mentioned make meadows, not lawns, mulch-free dirt. So these little solitary bees that nest in the ground don't like mulch. So if you can leave areas of your yard just with dirt, you might find holes and insects nesting in there. So, and put up a nesting blocks. And then this is one of the Bee Chica's lawns here. I don't know what plant this is, but they're low growing and she can mow over them. So dandelions are absolutely my favorite plant. I love them, even though they're not native, but they're really important to our honeybees and even our native bees in spring. It's one of the first food sources and most nutritious. So planting natives, encourage some more biodiversity in your yard with native plants, and then limit pesticides. Plants that are free of neonicotinoids, and you can ask at the greenhouse where you're buying. You can look up on our website at beechicas.com about more information on local nurseries that don't use neonics. So that is it. I hope that you go in your backyard and explore what's visiting your flowers. Is it a bee, wasp, or fly? And all of which are busy pollinating. And maybe you'll provide some habitat for them and more flowers and a nest box at some point. So thank you very much. I hope to see you back at the library soon.